It means freedom and self-reflection. It's an ability to leave the noise of the world behind and to focus on the one thing that really matters. It's an opportunity to get to know yourself in a way that no other thing or experience can allow you to do.
All right, what's up, community? Super excited to have you joining us for this episode of the podcast. I'm joined by a guy today who I call a good friend, someone who I've gotten a chance to know over the years. We're going to talk a little bit about that coming up. But first, let me say what up to my good friend, my buddy, the dude who I'm just excited to introduce you to, Mr. Shaahin Cheyene.
What's up, Mike? Good to see you.
Dude, first off, those of you who are seeing this on video, you can see I'm wearing this incredible shirt. So Shaahin is an entrepreneur. He's an author. He's a film director, motivational speaker, and then some, right? We're going to unpack every one of these little things because travel interweaves a lot of these conversations. First off, I'm holding up the book for people who can see on camera, your new book, Billon.
Yeah.
Highly, highly recommend this, people. I'm going to talk about it multiple times throughout this conversation. I couldn't put it down. We're going to go into a lot of these stories of the book. And you say, you actually, in the book, you say, all this is real. It sounds crazy, but it's real.
Yeah.
So let's do this. I really, I like to go backwards sometimes before we go forwards. And I want to go back to really where it started. And you were born and raised and you grew up in just outside of Tehran.
Yeah, that's right. I was born in Iran. My folks came from a pretty traditional Jewish Iranian background. And during the Iranian Revolution, they were thinking, man, we know how this could go. It's best we go somewhere that may be a little more friendly to us. So we took off and we came to the United States through Germany.
So you kind of just like skirted over that. And I want to talk about this because you speak about it, in pretty much detail in the book, talking about you had to flee literally in the middle of the night. How old were you at the time?
It was about 4 or 5.
But you remember vividly of like having to leave.
Yeah, I totally remember having to leave. You build a life somewhere, and when you're 4 or 5 years old, that's a pretty good time in your life for having these foundational memories that are built and kind of woven into the person you're going to become. Like with my kid, by the time he was like 3 or 4, I kind of we started to understand his unique personality. So I think something happens to you right around that time. So it's a very formative time, and we just had to pack everything up and leave, like friends, family, house, jobs, everything, and just take off and set up somewhere new, like literally overnight.
Yeah, you mentioned you went to Germany and then you ended up in the States. Now I wanted to bring this up because I think it's an interesting part of the story, but I also think it's a fascinating part of a conversation. Anyone who've had to leave because of potential persecution, right? Yeah. It's a pretty heavy conversation.
Yeah, so it's arguable with a lot of Persians because they're the ones. There are Persian Jews that stayed and that are prospering and doing fine in Iran. It turns out that the current regime, and we don't need to go into too much politics, but that they weren't as bad as other regimes in the past, in history, I should say, particularly for the Jews. So it turns out that it became more of an economic impact on people staying in Iran than opposed to people who moved. The people who moved to the United States, who moved to Europe, experienced greater opportunity. And of course, Iran was rapidly expanding. You had the Shah, whose main order was modernization overnight and expansion of Iran. But like him or hate him or whatever your politics are on that, he was building very quickly, and he was making good with all the Western powers. And so Iran was on track to becoming this kind of modern, revolutionized world in the Middle East, and potential for being what like Dubai is now. But what happened was that was obviously thwarted. I mean, I'm not an expert in that kind of history, but it was thwarted. And now run by clerics that, maybe their economic principles might have been different than if the Shah stayed in power.
And part of the reason I wanted to really start with this is that I normally like to ask people like, hey, what was your earliest travel memory? And I think for you, that was such a meaningful, impactful situation that not only were you uprooted for where you were growing up as a 4-year-old and what you knew, but you then were transplanted, to the States, and you grew up you moved to the Pacific Palisades, which is where I lived, ironically enough.
Yeah, I don't really think about that as travel. I kind of like seeing it as like getting our asses out of harm's way, right? So I think it's a little bit different. I mean, I was thinking today, because I knew I was going to be on your show. I was thinking today, like, what is my first time I actually traveled? Because travel is, it's really a luxury for people, right? Poor people feel they can't afford to travel. So it's something that you have to have the means to travel. You can't travel if you're broke. So, not really.
We can argue that.
Yeah, people would argue that. You do have, I was thinking like you have the gypsies or the travelers who actually do travel, but they're usually not broke for one reason or another. There are people who do that. I can shift that to say you can't comfortably travel by being broke. But, with that said, I was thinking, during the Herbal Ecstacy days, I invented this drug and it became a huge phenomenon. And during those days, I remember going to London, which I think was the first place that I traveled to. It really was. When we came here with my family, we didn't really go anywhere. We just stayed here. There was no traveling. We didn't have the funds to do that. We would travel across the country, like we'd go to San Francisco and Vegas and that kind of stuff, but that's about as far as we would go. But when I first made my money and started my company, the first place I went to was England, interestingly enough. And I remember traveling around a bit on my own, just kind of like after work was done, and I went to see Stonehenge and Woodhenge, and then I traveled a little bit further into Ireland and Scotland, and I remember feeling like I was at home. Not so much. It's not really, none of those places are my favorite places to be. Now I've traveled the world, but feeling that like the feeling of travel, the feeling of exploring the world and seeing other cultures really is home, much more so than a building with 4 walls and a roof on top of it. And I thought, what an extraordinary thing. I think it's one of the most impactful transformational experiences that anybody could have. And one of the few that you can do willingly and knowingly, if you have the ability to do so, that can change your life forever.
Yeah, well said. You hit on a lot of different cylinders and things. And one thing I'll say, because we're going to talk about your stories in this book that I think are impactful. One thing I'll say, that in this book, you throw so much incredible knowledge out there. You put so many just tidbits that we talk about actually within this community of travel with meaning, of I like to call the principles of meaning, and these organic stories that are organic principles that I've heard from people over and over again of what makes their meaningful journeys, right? What's made the most impact on them. And you have these just incredible things you keep bringing up in multiple chapters of your stories of things that happen. So I'm only sort of people just like hinting at this, because we're going to get into this whole incredible story that's happened to you and your incredible just journey. I want to just clear up what you said as far as just the travel. And it's not that I look at travel and you fleeing wasn't travel, but I look at that meaningful experience of what that was at a young age. And that, the fact that you wrote so clearly about it, and specifically in the book, really impacted me. So I wanted to make sure we at least touched on that. But let's get to something. You alluded already to this company you started, Herbal Ecstacy. And one thing we want to talk about is, you left home at a young age. You left home, what were you, like 16? 15. And you just were done, right? You just didn't want to conform to what your parents wanted, didn't feel like you're fitting in, and you just wanted to be on your own.
I needed a dramatic change. I needed that transformation, and I didn't yet know about travel, to be honest with you. So I needed something in my life to change. I couldn't go down the trajectory that was laid out for me. It wouldn't work for me. So I needed to find my freedom, find a path where I could realize what my true potential was. And a lot of times it's like being born. It's like one of the most dangerous things that you can do, right? That just the sheer act of being born. I mean, for ages and ages, your chances when a woman was giving birth were way worse than they are now, because it involved so much danger, right? You would have either the baby or the mother die. And I really see kind of life and transformation in that same way, in that if you want to get to a place where you're transformed, it involves some area of danger where at the very least a part of you can die.
It's very much the hero's journey, right?
The hero's journey.
You leave
That's
home,
right.
you face your fears, you slay your dragon, you come back, reinvigorated. One thing I do also want to bring up is, we just talked about, you needed a transformation, you needed a change in your life. You didn't have the easiest time growing up in the Palisades. And I will say this, that actually really hurt me for a lot of reasons. One, I grew up there. Two, I don't know, was I one of these kids that was an ass to you? I don't know. But like, I had this moment in reading the book and even wanting to have this conversation, like I felt bad that those moments actually were experienced by you, but at the same time, I see how it toughened you up and allowed you to do what you did. But I know I wanted to at least acknowledge that, because I think as a conscious, more evolved man, as opposed to a wise ass punk kid, who knows?
Yeah.
So I wanted to at least acknowledge that bullshit that you had to go through as a kid growing up in the Palisades, that, since it is my hometown, it does feel that way, like I don't want anyone to feel annoyed by that shit.
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay, because I feel that, I think what you're referring to is when we came here, we were immigrants. I didn't speak English for the first part of, a couple of years of living here. And it was during Iran-Contra, and just got a lot of ass kickings. So I wish I got a lot of ass. I got a lot of ass kickings. And it was just the process of continually getting beat down that led to grit. It led to resilience. It led to not really being able to be hurt. Like David Goggins talks about, like, can't hurt me. Mm-hmm. Like when shit like that happens to you on the regular, you either die or you thicken up. Your skin gets thick. Doesn't matter. There's nothing that they can do that could hurt you. And then later on in life, you can wear it as a shield, or you can wear it as a wound. It's entirely up to you.
Yeah. Well said.
And I chose to wear it as a shield. And it's interesting too. I like the concept. I was thinking about the name of your show, and I know the name of your thing, Travel with Meaning. And I think it's kind of like maybe it's like a catch-22, because I was thinking one of my favorite trips of all time was to Vietnam. And I know you're a fan of Vietnam. And I went to Vietnam maybe 15 years ago, something like that. And I just remember like landing there. And I remember having no meaning, and the travel having no meaning for me. But the fact they were telling me my room wasn't ready for like 8 hours. And I remember just putting on my headset. I hadn't slept in like 2 days. It was one of those flights. And I remember just getting lost in Ho Chi Minh, walking through the little alleyways and pathways and people cooking. And I played dice with the kids and hung out with the old dudes smoking their pipes and all the communist clothes. And then I went in somewhere and some lady made me some soup. It turns out that it was an animal that we don't eat here. I'm not proud of that fact, but it was in her home, so I ate it. And I was just walking the streets for like 6 to 8 hours. And I had in those days, I had what do you call those things that you used to listen to music on? That's Walkman. Not a phone. Yeah, no, not a Walkman. I had a
player, whatever.
iPod. I had an iPod. I had a fucking iPod. That's become a dinosaur. That shows you how old we've gotten, bud. but I had an iPod and I was just like, it was loaded with music and it was like the soundtrack to that trip. And I remember it was the most epic trip because it really just gave me a feeling of freedom and not having to define anything, not having to define the experience, not having to define the culture that I was in, not having any agenda for being there, but just getting lost. And that's such a beautiful thing because I feel like you can't really do that in life. In life, you can't just go out there with the intention of no intention and getting lost because you'll be misdirected and there's people who want to take advantage of you. But in travel, you can. And that's something that can change your life. That's one of the many trips that's changed my life.
Yeah. And I think, you made me think of the saying, not all who wander are lost, right? And something you talk about, which we're going to keep referencing over and over again, is you say throughout this book about going with the flow. And it seems like even when you were just kind of flowing and going down the streets and just allowing Vietnam to show up for you, you were just kind of going with it. And that is truly one of my favorite things. And we're going to get into some of these because you reference this so much. I want you to talk about Herbal Ecstacy. Because we just talked about, you left home at 15 and you had some hard times. You slept on the beach, you slept in your car, you slept on random people's couches. You didn't know a ton of people and you had some random teachers that would show up along the way, whether it's this guy, Ed, who you talked about, or we're going to talk about some of the other ones. Where did this concept for Herbal Ecstacy come from? And, share to the community, like what happened next for you?
All right. So I started when I was 15, like we were discussing, and I left home. I got involved in the electronic music scene. I met a mentor at the community college. I was again sleeping in abandoned buildings in the back of old cars, wherever I could lay my head. And I managed to get myself a girlfriend at that time. And I got the idea that I would create an alternative to the biggest party drug of that time, ecstasy, or MDMA, methyldioxymethamphetamine. And so I've never taken it. Back in those days, I'd never taken it since I had. And I thought to myself, man, how do I come up with an alternative to this? So I started talking to people, and lo and behold, people started helping me out. I started calling people and people started showing me how I would go about doing such a thing. And turns out after a few tries, I came up with a formula that worked really well and turned out to be a really good party pill. And I started taking it to the clubs initially. I got it distributed through the drug dealers in the clubs. From there, we expanded to brick and mortar and we were selling all over the world. And by the time I was 18, we had created hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. And the company was poised to be one of the biggest supplement companies like the world had ever known. Pretty exciting time.
Yeah, pretty exciting. I want to just kind of stop on two things right there. One, just the scope of understanding 15 to 18, someone who just created this grit in your life of it's okay to sleep in buildings, figuring it out. You just kept going. And then turning this into a profitable business, making hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars a year, figuring it out as you went along, right? You get so detailed in the book about, you didn't know what you didn't know.
Yeah.
And the stuff that would come with it.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. And it was a wild ride. But like you said, I was determined and I was going to do whatever it took for me to succeed. And I had those qualities. I think I still do, but I had the qualities of determination, of eagerness, of relentlessness, of ruthlessness that you have to succeed in business. And when I say ruthlessness, people are like, oh my God, that's terrible. It's like, well, no, you have to be ruthless. You have to be ruthless first and foremost with yourself. You have to be able to know the shit that you're good at and the shit that you suck at. And then you have to have the ability to bring people on to help you and the ruthlessness to be able to cut them when they're not helping you on your journey. And that's what I did. I got really fucking good at that. And we told a really good story and we made a really good product and we were making hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah. So let's talk about this. I mean, you're literally living this rock star lifestyle now, right? From a kid who left home at 15 to you had homes in Malibu, you had home in Topanga, you were, partying with legit rock stars, movie stars in a time where, this Herbal Ecstacy, which you created it was hot. It was a hot ticket.
Yeah. So I'll tell you a funny story about that since we're in storytelling mode.
Please.
So I get invited to, it's like England. And we take a private jet out there with a buddy of mine who's a billionaire clothing mogul. And we're going to, a huge fan of George Michael back in those days. We were going to George Michael's birthday party. It was a Cowboys and Angels themed birthday party. I think it was in England, in London. And we were going with the band REM that had a concert, and we were there at the concert with REM. This is all mind blowing for me. I was a kid that was sleeping in abandoned cars, and now I'm literally traveling with, like the high elite. And so we go to our first stop, which was I think some restaurant or something, and there is the entire band of U2, the entire band. You got Bono, you got The Edge. They're just there. They're just there. And they obviously recognize the REM guys. They recognize my buddy who's friends with their manager. We all sit down. They're like, hey, let's all go together. So now fast forward, we are now in George Michael's party. I think Elton John was there and U2, REM, and they're all sitting at a table. And here I walk in. And they motioned for me to come to the table because they've been talking about Herbal Ecstacy, and I brought them some. And now I'm sitting at this table with George Michael, Elton John, the entire band U2, REM, my buddy who's a billionaire, and like a couple other celebrities. There was some supermodel, something like that. I had absolutely nothing to say to them. There was nothing to say. I was just sitting there going, oh, oh. It was one of those moments where I was like, holy shit. Like, I am not the same as these guys. These guys are on a different, like, these are legit. And they were all so down to earth. And they were just having the most chill conversation ever. And it was so relaxed. And I would think to myself that these guys were all my idols, that I would have so much to say to them, so much to ask of them. But I was just completely like, oh. And it was just funny. My friend was like, you were very quiet, Shaahin. I was like, I know. It was very amusing. And then I think U2 the same week was having their big Pop Mart tour. And so we got backstage at Pop Mart and we were hanging out with the band and everything. And it was an amazing time, but that's how, that was just how I rolled. It was like private planes, jets, boats, yachts, traveling this place, this celebrity, that guy wants you there. And I was the it thing in those days. Everybody wanted the long-haired kid who came up with the cool party drug.
Right. The legal ecstasy party drug at the time. You in your stories, and I feel like you told me this like a couple of years ago when we were hanging out, is that you're reserved with your stories now. And I think what I gather and what I've heard actually from you say before is that sometimes the stories are so incredible, like, hanging out with Elton John and George Michael and U2, that you don't want to sound like you're full of shit or you're making all this up to people. But as you say in the book, or as you've said to other people, I've heard you say, is like, all this happened. Like, I'm going to tell you things that are going to blow your mind. You're probably not going to believe. And we're going to get to some more of these stories that I still couldn't believe. And you'll hear me say this a couple of times in this conversation, get this book. And I say this because I think Shaahin is going to be really just, not that I'm saying you're humble about this stuff, because I love how proud you are about what you've been through, but the book is, I think, a wonderful lesson on whether it's determination, grit, passion, but also just the stories and just the time where we were living in then was just mind blowing. But I want to go to something really quick, because I mentioned this going with the flow, and we're going to jump around your story. There was one time you talked about being on a first class train. I think it was France.
Yeah.
Right. And you talked about going with the flow, and you talked about you just happened to be talking to the person next to you.
Yeah.
You want to tell the story?
Yeah. So this is one of the points that I like to make, and it's about synchronicity. It's what Csikszentmihalyi, before he passed away, talked about in his book Flow. And it's being in a state where you are the best version of who you are. Being in that state, like if you're a chef and that's what you do, and when you're cooking, you're in that flow and the world just stops and everything slows down and it's you and the food and this beautiful creation that you're making as an example. So there's periods of our lives, I believe, where we're in a flow and we come across something that I like to call synchronicity. And that is when you are following your highest path, whatever is the right move for you, others will be drawn to you. And all the things that you need will be attracted to you. And I'm not a big fan of woo woo or law of attraction or any of that stuff. It's not really what I'm about. I mean, if you're into that, cool. More power to you. You still got to get the fuck out there and work and hustle. But outside of that, I feel that if you work on making yourself excellent, if you work on bringing excellence in what you do, excellence in your word, excellence in your action, excellence in the product or service that you bring to the world, excellence in the story that you tell, and the person that you become, being a self-reflective person and looking back and going, fuck, man, I was an asshole there. But in this particular situation, I was really kind and a good person, and I did the right thing. When you get into that mode, the world kind of kowtows to you. The world, and I mean, like the world, the universe, whatever you want to call it, and experiences and people that you need to get to the next level in your life start coming to you. It's kind of how I teach people now. I've got an Amazon course where I teach people how to make money on Amazon and start Amazon companies. And it's kind of what I teach on there is pull selling as opposed to push selling. Instead of being a disruption marketer, going out there and banging on people's doors. Hey, buddy, you want sugar water? Hey, you want sugar water? Hey, you want sugar water? Instead, you just chill on a beautiful rolling grass and you have beautiful people having a refreshing beverage. Who doesn't want to be a part of that? People will come to you. That's the difference. And really, I think that's what it's about. Synchronicity, being in the flow, is not being needy, not being desperate, being directed, not being tied to outcomes, but rather about excellence, about going out into the world and being the best fucking fill in the blank that you can be. And the rest of it will come to you. And I really believe that's the case. And anybody who's ever been in the dating world and in relationships or any of that kind of thing knows that when you really are like desperate for someone, they tend to go there like, oh man. But when you don't care, when it doesn't matter and it's cool, yeah, I want to hang out with this person, or, you know, and if it doesn't happen, that's cool too. I got other things going on. That's when you start experiencing the flow. And life is like that too, I believe. So for me, in this particular time, I was doing the thing that was part of my highest path. And I really believe that people noticed that. People could sense it when I would go somewhere. People would see how hungry I was, literally, figuratively, spiritually, however you want to say. I was hungry. And I would go out there. I was hungry for information. I was hungry for friendship. I was hungry for knowledge. I was hungry to make money, all that stuff. It was never really that I was chasing money. I didn't really care that much about it. I was there to make an impact, to put a dent in the universe, as Steve Jobs would say. And that was really what kept me going. And I tell the story often that I now 6 months before had been sleeping in this abandoned Lincoln Continental, a rust bucket, but beautiful car. It was a similar car to what Kennedy was in. President Kennedy was in that famous motorcade, and the car was very big. And I would tape the pages of Think and Grow Rich to the inside of the trunk and read it at night with a flashlight. And then you fast forward 6-8 months later, I'm running a company with 200 employees. I've got a collection of exotic cars. I fall asleep drooling on the passenger seat of my brand new Lamborghini, bad look, and wake up to walk into my office. I was only sleeping like 2 hours a day at this time because I was falling asleep on the factory floor, wherever I had to, because we were making product for 25 cents selling it for $20. We were making buckets of cash. And I remember walking into the office and the news broke that we had surpassed $1 billion in revenue. And I didn't even know how much $1 billion was, Mike. I had no idea, no clue. I literally did not know how much $1 billion in money was. And it was funny.
I love how all that. Back us up again and tell us the story I started teeing us up about being in this first class train in France and being in the flow.
Yeah. So if I remember it correctly,
you have a lot of stories.
It's a lot of stories in that book, but I think you're talking about the time I was in a train. I'm in Paris. I think I was going to some small town there. And while I'm sitting there, the guy next to me is opening up this newspaper, and there I am on the back of the page. He's reading about me as I'm sitting there in the first class cabin. And then he looks over, invites me over, and he ended up becoming one of our distributors. Did I get my own story right?
Yeah, it's pretty much dead on. And I really, again, wanted to bring it up, and you so eloquently described it as about going with the flow. And again, as we're going to talk about in this conversation, as much as you have these incredible stories that reflect on travel, and travel, by the way, isn't necessarily about going anywhere, even though, I'll share this with you, the dictionary definition of travel is to go from one place to another, generally over a great distance. Now, what I'll say, and I think a lot of us have learned this from the pandemic, sometimes we know that the not all journeys are measured in miles, as I like to say with travel with meaning, and sometimes the greatest journey is that inside job. When you're traveling and you're in flow and you're outside of your daily routine, as you just said, that's where the magic happens. Woo-woo, whatever you want to talk about. That's when you're flowing, and that's where risk, reward, universe things show up. So thank you for sharing that story of the distributor who just magically sat next to you. There's a story in there about Japan that I've been dying to talk to you about. And that's when
tell me.
A guy shows up in your office, briefcase full of cash. You get on a plane and you go to Japan.
Yeah.
And you end up having this really high level meeting, if you will. I want you to share this story because I really had to read this chapter twice for two reasons. One, because I couldn't believe it, but knowing you and knowing that you're like, everything is pretty crazy, but pretty true. I just was just.
Did you really read it twice, Mike?
Dude, it was so incredible because I was also visualizing. You're going to tell this story, but I was visualizing. You're sitting in this room, the door opens, the guy comes in, and like, I saw the movie already there, right? It's freaking amazing, this scene. Tell everyone, tell us the guy shows up in your office with the cash. Set the stage for us. What happens?
All right. So we're already making hundreds of millions of dollars. I'm in my office in Venice Beach, right in Venice Circle and Windward Circle. And a mysterious man shows up. People showed up all the time. And I was very accessible, surprisingly. And this guy shows up. He's got a briefcase or like a duffel bag kind of situation. He's got $1 million cash and a ticket, invitation to go to Tokyo for a business meeting. They were interested in one of the products that we had. I understood. And I got there, and turns out that this was actually a meeting with the Yakuza, one of the mafia families in Japan, who are very serious dudes and who were intimately involved in all the sex products businesses in Japan. Drugs very illegal in Japan, especially at that time. Like, you could actually have the police could come to your house. This was a crazy thing. Most people don't know this. Police could come to your house. And I think there's very little, rules about search and seizure in that way, because they're a very compliant society, all about politeness and compliance. And they could spray some kind of powder on your furniture. And if it shows traces of drugs, including just weed, you would go to jail for a very long time. That's how serious they are about drugs in Japan, at least in those days. I haven't been in some years. So there I am meeting with the Yakuza about distribution. And I was feeling very uncomfortable in a room that was very heavy. And it turns out that I don't want to ruin it for people who want to read the book. So spoiler alert, but it turns out that my understanding of why I was there and their understanding of why I was there was very different. And I had to do some tricky negotiating to be able to get out of that situation. And obviously, by the fact that I'm here shows you that I got out, but I'm going to leave it to people to read the book or watch the movie when it comes out in the next couple of years to find out what actually happened there.
All right. Well, so first off, Yeah, I will say this. You definitely need to read the book for that actual story, and the movie, which you just alluded to, is going to be coming out in the near future. So for you in that moment, it was how many people were in the room when you're there waiting for the boss guy to come in?
It's like maybe a couple dozen. I mean, dude, it was amazing. So first off, most people don't know Japan is a very closed culture. They're okay with tourists inside of Tokyo proper. And outside of that, they don't see too much tourism. They just don't. Very few people speak English outside of Tokyo proper, or, I'm sure if there's like another big city like Okinawa or whatever, in this big cities or what they consider big cities, there will be some people that speak English, but there's areas where you can go where the signs are entirely in Japanese. And imagine not being able to understand the characters, how you get around, or any of that stuff. I'm sure it's made easier now with mobile technology and phones and stuff, but back then there was none of that. And so we were at an actual, what they call a ryokan. And a ryokan is a traditional Japanese structure, house. I don't know what you call it. And the floors are all these beautiful rice tatami mats. And you've got these rice paper dividers. And this particular event that I was at, it was in a ryokan that had a restaurant. And next to it, it was in a village. And the village was like this hot springs town. And dude, I remember after going there, I remember those monkeys, the ones with the red faces, and they put their hands in there. Those monkeys, their hands are in there. But the people I were with had to sneak me in to this little like spa resort town out there because they don't take tourists. You have to be Japanese. Why? Because they don't trust anybody who's not Japanese, because everybody knows everybody. There's literally no crime. People would leave like a briefcase out. People would leave their watches. Like nobody steals anything because everybody knows everybody there. And they just don't take kindly to tourists. It's an island nation, this little town. And I remember it just being absolutely beautiful, but they had to go in, and actually the place we stayed one of those nights, they all went in, they were all Japanese, and they got the room. And funny enough, it's just one room and everybody sleeps on the floor in the same room. It's very sparse. There's nothing there. It's just those mats, but they charge you per person that sleeps in the same room. And I remember they told them that there would be like 6 of us. And the lady was asking, where's the 6th? And they said the guy's asleep in the car. And then when we woke up in the morning, she saw that I wasn't Japanese, and the lady had a mega freak, but they kind of calmed her down. So I think Japan is still, I think, for a good part, unexplored to a lot of travelers, especially the really good parts of it, because you got to have somebody who's Japanese, who's willing to take the risk to take you to some of these places. But what an exceptional time. What an extraordinary time. And by the time it came down to the meeting with the Yakuza, the crime boss that I met with, it was in another one of these incredible buildings. And we had the geishas pouring the tea and the sake, and they keep pouring sake for me because I think it's part of the tradition to you got to get drunk with them. Similar in China, doing business there. It's like everybody wants you to get drunk and let loose. And I didn't drink, dude. I didn't do drugs. I didn't drink. I didn't smoke. So I remember having a cup of water that I had emptied out. And I would just take the sake and I'd say, yes, cheers. And I'd pour it into the water cup. And I would just keep pouring it into the water cup under the table because I didn't drink. But some extraordinary places in Japan. There was one place we went to in one of the mornings where we went hiking, and it was like a volcanic area. And they had this gorgeous lake. And the lake was like fluorescent green.
I would love to go one day, and I will tell everyone again, I think Shaahin did not do the proper justice. You get to read the book for that story, because I literally was on pins and needles of you waiting in this room for this boss, if you will, to come in. And I know you talked about a movie in the future. I can't wait for this freaking scene. There is a line you say in the book that I wanted to share. It says, travel for me was both exploration and avoidance. What did you mean by that?
Well, this was a time in my life where a lot of people were taking advantage of me. So you have to remember, I was a teenager. I had a grade school education. 10 years before, 11 years before, I didn't speak English. And now I'm running a company worth well over $1 billion. And everybody wants a piece of me. And a lot of people felt that I didn't deserve it, and they did. So what did they do? They stole, they cheated. I had people doing all kinds of stuff. And I kind of wanted to turn a blind eye. I kind of wanted to get away from that because it was too hard for me to digest. It was just too much. And what I should have done is seeked a mentor. I found somebody who would guide me through that process. But I think I was too cocky and arrogant at that time to allow that to happen. And I was making too much money and living too good of a life. So I just didn't care. And when things got tough, sometimes I would deal with them, but to my, great regret, sometimes I would just take off and I would go traveling because again, I'd have that sense that I'm at home. I'd feel like, man, this is amazing. I'd go to the Amazon. I traveled to the Amazon. I hung out with cannibals there. I met a guy that said he could introduce us to one of the previously uncontacted tribes. And we went out there and we made contact with an uncontacted tribe in the Amazon rainforest. I had ayahuasca right there on one of the boats. I had the dudes that shot the stuff through your nose with a tube and you spin around for 5 minutes. I did all that stuff. But at the end of the day, I was never really there during the ecstasy days because I always knew that there was something missing, that I had to come back and deal with my business and deal with some of these difficult life challenges that were happening and I didn't want to see. It was challenging. But I think we all do that. I think we have a tendency to want to avoid, to want to ignore that elephant in the room.
Yeah.
And for me, the elephant was there was a lot of people that were taking advantage of my generosity. They were taking advantage of my naivety. They were taking advantage of the fact that I was vulnerable and that I wasn't educated like most people would expect the CEO of $1 billion company to be.
You brought something up, and again, I'm not going to give it away for people who want to read the book, because again, you should read the book. It's called Billon. Fantastic. We mentioned something about being cocky, and let's talk about cocky and ego, because there were some things that happened to the company. Again, we're not giving shit away here, but I wonder for you, I know you have no regrets about how it turned out. You said that in the book. You said, I don't have any regrets at the way it all turned out. But, in looking back and looking at where you had to go to heal, or the transformation you as a person, as a businessman, as a human being, where did you go? What were your transformational moments after, when you were trying to come through this other side of letting go of that ego, letting go of that cockiness, once this went on to where it was going to go?
So there's a couple moments that stand out, and I think I can only tell it through those stories. So the first moment was when I got in and I realized, like, all these people who work for me are buying really expensive things. And I'm like, I pay you guys well, but I don't pay you condo in Beverly Hills well. Like, I don't pay you sailing the Greek Isles well. How are you guys all doing this? Like, how is this one guy? I used to know this guy who worked for me, who was in a lower level job. And back in those days, Ray-Ban sunglasses were a big deal. And every day he'd get 2 or 3 pairs of Ray-Ban sunglasses shipped to the office. And I'd be like, do the math. I don't know. They were like $100 a piece. I was like, that's a lot. That's more than I pay you. You're getting in sunglasses. So I remember thinking, you know what? Fuck it. This is not going to be as comfortable of a place to work anymore. And I came in and I took out all the furniture. I called Goodwill and the Big Boys Club, or the Big Brothers Club of America. There was one up in Venice. And I said, hey, take everything here. Every stick of furniture, gone. And the employees were floored, like, what the fuck is going on? What is he doing? And I said, okay. So now, and I remember, because they were all literally standing around the water cooler. And I said, oh yeah, that goes too. And they were like, what? I was like, oh yeah, that goes too. That's a perk. It's all going. Bring your own fucking water bottles. And I emptied the place out. I said, bring pillows. From now on, we're sitting on the floor. Okay. Everyone's gotten way too fucking comfortable in here. And then the rumors started, and there was whispers and hushes and, he's going out of business. He's lost all his money. The government is coming, this, that, and the other. And then I just started to listen. And I had a few people that I trusted that were kind of like, where's this noise coming from? And then I started looking at the people, and I was like, you know what? Everybody is either stealing, has some kind of a scam, or is in on somebody else's stealing, with the exception of a handful of them. So the very next week, I lined everyone up. I didn't have many rules in those days, but I was like, if you work for me and you get hired, I hire you. And if you get fired, I fire you personally. And there were about 200 employees. All of Venice Beach, all that entire circle was me. All those buildings were mine. We were printing ecstasy t-shirts in one of those buildings. I had another music studio where we were making ecstasy music. We had experimental lab where we were cooking up prototypes. I had a call room with 100 and something different operators who were taking calls for Herbal Ecstacy. And I remember lining them all up one day, and they each came to me, and everybody knew. I said, you're getting fired. You're gone. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Can't use you anymore. Sorry. Gotta go. 200 people. Took me all day to do. And I fired every single one of them. And I remember sitting in this big empty office, just a few of those old computers sitting around, and the phones ringing off the hooks, nobody answering them. And just looking around me without all the noise and going, what the fuck just happened? Like, what the fuck just happened? And then I cleaned it up from there. Then a few people called me back. And I remember that was my rule. The people who are guilty, who have guilty consciences, who've done some bad shit, know what they did. And they think that I knew. I didn't know really at that time. I found out later, but I didn't know at that time. And the ones that didn't would call back and say, hey, could I have my job back? What did I do? Can you tell me what happened? And those were the people who I brought back. And then I hired some new people. And then I did find some people who I could rely on and trust on and trust. And I started building things back up, but this time the right way. And I learned, which was the most important thing. They say when you lose, don't lose the lesson. And that was the last time I ran a company like that. And from there on out, I learned that you can't be anybody's friend. Employee is not your friend. You can be friendly to them. You can be fair, but it's better to be feared than to be liked. It's better to have a reputation of someone who's feared but fair than somebody who's friendly and your buddy. I learned that if given the chance, people will look out for their own best interest, and that their own self-best interest, and that you have to be the architect. You have to design things where, given a reasonable opportunity, people will do the right thing. You have to give them the chance to do the right thing. You can't just lay it all out and assume that they're not going to put their hands in the cookie jar. Yeah. You got to put a little padlock on the cookie jar and have the key in your pocket and make sure that they ask you for permission for it. And when I learned that and started implementing systems, implementing human resources, I didn't have any of that stuff, dude. I had my office in Venice filled with duffel bags, filled with cash and pills. I mean, I didn't know how much cash I had. I mean, there's millions of dollars in cash in these duffel bags piled up to the ceiling. And I remember just like looking at them. And I remember when the call went out that we had made $1 billion. And I was thinking to myself, fuck, man, I got to get an accountant. And I'd get these accountants in. And I'd be like, all right, well, you start today, so just go ahead. And they'd be like, what? Be like, well, there's the cash. You're accountant, right? Count. And I realized very quickly that accountants are not the guys that count the cash in the duffel bags and separate the pills from the cash. I learned that. But that was just kind of the life we lived. I mean, I went on tour with Lollapalooza. We had pills going in. I made them buy RVs because we had no other safe way of getting the money and the pills to each show. And we would shuttle back the RVs, and the RV would be filled with cash coming back home. Never as much cash as it left the event with. But some of that cash would make its way back to our office, and then we'd fill it with pills, and it would go back to the next tour site, and we would rotate RVs. And when one broke down, we wouldn't even bother fixing it. I just give them cash and go, just fucking find an RV, buy another one. And we had RVs, we had vans. I was trying to buy one of those old military helicopters once. I thought that would be really cool to do. And I got very close to buying one. And then turns out that it's probably not the best idea.
No, probably not. So you were the king of the thrill pill. I want to make sure we make one thing really clear, though, is that we're talking about all these pills, but this was legal herbal ecstasy, right? So on that side, it wasn't illegal. And there was this gray area that you were able to really exploit in a great way and make an incredibly successful business out of.
Yeah, it was legal for the majority of the time that I was selling it.
Right.
And then they kept making parts of it illegal and banning ingredients. And we would change up the formula. And then they would change up the laws. And then we would change up the formulas, and they would make new laws. And it became a little bit of a game of cat and mouse until one day it wasn't.
Yeah. Well, I want to go back to that statement, because you started talking about the lessons with the employees, but I want to go back to you. And I want to go back to you is when
I don't think I've ever told that story before either on a show. So
which one, about the firing everyone or about the?
Yeah, this is a Travel with Meaning exclusive.
Dun, dun, dun. We'll take the exclusive. It is also in this incredible book called Billon that I'm telling everyone they need to get because
Billon, How I Became King of the Thrill Pill Cult. It's on Amazon, Stitcher, Spotify, anywhere where books are found. But if you guys like listening to audiobooks, we dropped the Audible book just a couple weeks back. So the Audible book, I'm narrating it. If you want to hear the full story of this, check out Billon, How I Became King of the Thrill Pill Cult.
I might even listen to it again myself. I just might. But I want to key in on one thing for yourself. So you shared the story about firing everyone and what was going on there and when you had to make some changes. But I want to go back to you. I want to go back to you when you were reeling from everything that had happened, or what happened with the business, or government coming after you, or laws and things. And you allude a couple of times in the book about your ego and cockiness and hindsight, maybe you should have done things a little differently. But for you, did you have somewhere that you went? Did you have somewhere that, you talked about being in the Amazon. Did you have somewhere that you retreated to that allowed for some transformation to take place? Is there one experience, trip, moment that actually came together for you, that when you stepped away from all the noise?
I had friends in Ireland at that time. I had a very close friend in Ireland. He was the founder of the Academy of Everything is Possible. I think he called it something like that. He was an extraordinary human being. And I would go to Ireland often and hang out with him. And he always had very interesting people like Allen Ginsberg and William Burroughs and all the great writers of that era's gone by would be at the house. And he was a very unique individual that collected people. That was, he said, I collect people. That was his interesting thing. He was a very wealthy man, very successful. And so I would travel there and hang out with him. And then I would go to the Irish countryside and I would hang out with different people there. I was a big fan of going to Jamaica. So I would travel to Jamaica often. I had friends there where I'd kind of go off the beaten path and hang out with the old Rasta dudes and a bunch of very colorful characters there who treated me like one of their own. It was amazing times there. So I would retreat to there. I would also be a big fan of going to Southeast Asia, Thailand, India. So yeah, I mean, I think, especially when you're wealthy and you've got as much money as you will ever need, there's no limits to where you can travel.
Sure.
So I would travel everywhere, all over the world. I mean, there's very few places I haven't been. I've been to Africa, I've been to Australia, I've been to, the majority, there's a few places I haven't been that I'm still looking forward to going.
Tell everyone now, what you do in your business with Amazon, and how when Amazon really first came out, you were early adopter to getting into what you're doing now.
Yeah. So early on, I got on the Amazon train. There's a little bald guy who's starting this website, and people were like, yeah, it was a Silicon Valley nerd. He's opening up a bookstore. It's cool, whatever. And I looked closer at it. And this was back when Bezos was accessible. You could email him, he'd respond back. You could call and probably get him on the phone if you had business there. And I remember reaching out, and we heard through the grapevine that he was opening up his platform to third-party sellers. So I thought, all right, I had a brain pill at the time called Accelerol. We still sell it. And I thought to myself, man, let me sell this on this platform. It was expensive. It was like $120 a month for this stuff. So I put it up on there, and dude, we got thousands of orders. And I thought to myself, let me look into this a little bit more. Maybe this guy isn't a chump. And I looked into it and I was like, wait a second. This guy's a fucking genius, more so than Steve Jobs. He's going to be revolutionizing e-commerce. He's a disruptor. He is what Piggly Wiggly was to retail. And I looked very closely at him and I said, you know what? I'm going to hop on the train, putting all my eggs in the Amazon basket. And I learned Amazon to a mastery level of proficiency. And now I teach people how you start an Amazon business, how you find a product, how you get reviews, and how anybody can take advantage of this platform that Jeff Bezos has built to make them rich. People are too busy thinking about, oh, look at this guy, his fucking spaceship looks like a dick and he's flying to space. And, why should he be the 1% and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, no, he's going to give you an opportunity to become a millionaire. More people are going to become millionaires and billionaires through the disruptive technology that Jeff Bezos has built than any other technology in the last 20 years. And anybody can do it. And that's what we teach now. And I have a course for any of your listeners or community that are interested. I encourage you. It's still day one. Go out there and start an Amazon company. I've got a course that's normally $200 because we go way back. And I love travel with meaning. We're gonna give it to you for free. So
wow, that's a huge thing.
Reach out to me directly. It's darkzess@gmail.com, DARKZESS @gmail.com. And we're going to go ahead and give you the 1-hour course for free. Just mention travel with meaning in the subject heading.
Appreciate it. That's very sweet of you.
I have a special place in my heart for Mexico. Love going to Mexico, Mexico City. It's like a second home for me. I love all of those areas. I made a film in Mexico in 2005 called Serpent in the Sun, how I became king of the tropical cult. I'm mixing it up. It's the film is called Serpent in the Sun, Tales of an Aztec Apprentice. And it's about one of the last living Aztec medicine men at the time. He's since deceased, but it's a documentary. It's pretty cool. But I got to know the Aztec people and to hang out with the Mexica people, the Aztec people, the people of a particular tradition, their shamans, their medicines, all their traditions. By the way, they don't like being called shamans. And so I think Mexico is one of those places where it's so close to us here in the United States and especially in Los Angeles that you can go. I think Mexico City is like 3.5 hours and you can go there and see one of the greatest pyramids that's ever been built. Like in one, I think it's probably the most recent pyramid. And you can go there and you can see, one of the great remnants of one of these ancient civilizations. And not only that, you can see the people of that civilization still very much so alive, just in new generations.
Let me ask you this question. What does travel mean to you?
It means freedom and self-reflection. It's an ability to leave the noise of the world behind and to focus on the one thing that really matters. It's an opportunity to get to know yourself in a way that no other thing or experience can allow you to do, because you're doing it not only through the lens of being away from your own bubble, from your own life, but also by being immersed in a culture that is not your own. The distance allows you to have a clarity of purpose and a clarity of understanding of who you are.
Well said.
Did I go too deep?
No, dude, hardly. Shaahin, I have to tell you this, and I think I said before we even started the show, like I am honored to call you a friend, but I really just appreciate the times we've talked and your support, your encouragement, your words of wisdom over the years are just, they haven't gone unnoticed and unappreciated. And I just want to say thank you just wholeheartedly of who you are, not only just in community, but to me, you're really just a good dude, and I appreciate you very much.
I appreciate you too, bud. Thanks for that. Yeah.
And on that note, let's play a speed round of questions. How's that?
Let's do it.
All right, we're going to put about 60 seconds on the clock starting now. What is your current country count?
36.
Place you still want to visit?
Mongolia.
Place you tell people to visit?
Mongolia.
Window or aisle?
Always window.
Mountains or beach?
Beach.
Boat or train?
Boat.
Scuba dive, skydive?
Scuba dive.
Kindle, hard copy?
Hard copy.
Sunrise, sunset?
Sunrise.
World Cup, World Series?
World Cup.
North Pole, South Pole?
South Pole.
Do you collect anything from your travels?
And I like collecting experiences and people.
Your best travel lesson?
Only eat fried food in India.
Favorite national park?
I'm going to say Grand Canyon.
Favorite airline?
I'm going to say Emirates.
Favorite hotel?
I am going to go with, the Nizook in Cancun. Beautiful hotel.
All right. Favorite food?
Favorite food is obviously sushi.
Favorite place in the world?
Favorite place in the world is California.
Well said. I appreciate you, my friend. Tell everyone where they can find you and where we can see you on the interwebs and everything.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Anybody that's interested, if you guys want to learn how to make money on Amazon, again, I don't make money from the 1 hour course. It'll be free for you. So just reach out to me. It's darkzess@gmail.com, darkzess@gmail.com. And I'll get you going on that at no charge. Just mention travel with meaning in the subject heading. We also have a podcast, and we'll rebroadcast this on our podcast at some point when we get the opportunity. That's going to be the Hack and Grow Rich podcast, which you can get that on Amazon, Apple, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, wherever podcasts are found. And you can look me up, ShaahinCheyene.com. We'll include it in the show notes. And the book is called Billon, How I Became King of the Thrill Pill Cult. Available now. Ooh, you got hard copy. I like that. Available now on Amazon and Audible. Get it. Leave me a review. I am grateful for everybody who's read and been a part of that story. And you're now part of the story, Mike. So
yeah, buddy. Any final stories? Anything we missed? Anything you thought of while we were talking here that you're like, oh, I want to tell this?
No, we've been going for an hour and a half. So I think we got through the spirit of what we're saying. And I think it was Timothy Leary, the great psychedelic explorer, psychologist, who said, it's not if you can understand what I'm saying, but if you can understand what I mean. And I think that goes to the spirit of it. Something like that. I probably butchered the quote, but it's really about, do you get the spirit of what we're communicating here? And I think we did a good job communicating to the audience. So I think that's okay.
I think we did. All right, people. We'll see you on the open road very soon. Peace. This episode has been produced by the phenomenal Aaron Hatton and original music provided by Billy Galewood.